most likely voters still think Donald Trump is better to handle the economy. Why do you think that is?
Well, here's what I know in terms of the facts. Donald Trump left us with the worst economy since the Great Depression when you look at, for example, the employment numbers.
It was during COVID.
Much has been said about the Stephanie Rhuhle interview on MSNBC. Was it an interview? I think it was a full body massage. I'm not sure. But either way, it didn't do much for Kamala Harris so far. Every time she goes out and does a debate or does an interview of sorts, she actually ends up hurting herself. I guess now we know why she doesn't do this very often. But there was one exchange that I found very fascinating. I want to watch her answer this question from Stephanie Rhuhle, and then we'll have the roundtable answer it. Watch.
Polling shows that most likely voters still think Donald Trump is better to handle the economy. Why do you think that is?
Well, here's what I know in terms of the facts. Donald Trump left us with the worst economy since the Great Depression when you look at, for example, the employment numbers.
It was during COVID, and employment was so high because we shut down the government, we shut down the country.
Even before the pandemic, he lost manufacturing jobs by most people's estimates, at least 200,000. He lost manufacturing plants, ask the auto workers.
Okay, she went on, but Akash, you get the picture. She basically answered that question by saying two things. Number one, voters who think that about Donald Trump are just ill-informed and don't know the facts. But then the facts that she laid out were not accurate. So first, what do you make of her answer? And then, if I may, how would you answer that question? Why do you think voters right now give greater confidence to Donald Trump on the economy than Kamala Harris?
Because it's not a theoretical question. We have 3.5 years of Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration policies, and 4 years of Trump administration policies. And let's just take the first 3 years, right? We're in the fourth year of the Biden-Harris administration. And then the fourth year of the Trump years was the pandemic. So let's take the first 3 years and just look at the track record. And again, as we've discussed, thanks to the tax cuts and reg cuts, jobs were booming, wage growth was booming. The country was very, very prosperous up and down the socioeconomic ladder. The exact opposite has been true with Kamala Harris as vice president. They've been ravaged by inflation that she caused by casting the tie-breaking votes for trillions in additional spending. So again, it's not a theoretical question. She kind of tries to grasp at straws with this manufacturing thing. That was obviously something fed to her by her team, that she found this might have been an appropriate time to pull that out. It's, again, and to be fair, people in both parties kind of make this point. It's complete nonsense. Our manufacturing output and capacity has continued to increase for years and years and decades as we've gotten more efficient, stronger, better, faster at building things in this country. And then by nature, obviously, you need fewer people to do those things as you become better at them. It's a completely irrelevant point to their economic records. And there's no question that his was better than this one. And there's no theory or open kind of subjectiveness about it.
Yeah, and it is pretty remarkable for her to immediately pivot and say, well, the voters don't know what they're talking about. It's like that's a tough message. I know she didn't use those words, but that's really the message. She said, here, let me explain to you how bad it was under Trump. And, well, Matt Foldy, Mikash makes a good point. You don't need to explain to us what it was like under Trump. We remember what it was like under Trump. And have we reached the point where no one's blaming Trump for the Fauci Wuhan pandemic? They see that for what it was?
Well, one thing that's interesting about the coronavirus is that there's a committee dedicated to investigating its origins in Congress. And the top Democrat on it, Raul Ruiz, has, last I checked, still not determined where the pandemic came from, which tells you how seriously Democrats have taken that. Now, looking at this interview, remember the Stephanie Rhuhle, again, all but endorsed Kamala Harris before doing the interview. I think that's why she was given the interview. And the reason why I think Americans don't trust Kamala Harris on the economy, especially over Donald Trump, is two things. One, you look at the Trump economy, again, before COVID, right? That not exactly his fault there, and hard to deal with a once-in-a-century pandemic. I don't think people were necessarily blaming Woodrow Wilson for the Spanish influenza economy, right? And so Trump, booming economy. And then Kamala Harris, two things. One, look at the Biden record as far as you look at the Biden-Harris record. The Biden record, of course, as Akash said, Inflation Reduction Act, she cast the deciding vote on this, then tried to sell it across the country, right? That did not exactly go over very well. And then you look at the Harris aspect of the Biden-Harris administration, and what you see from her is Marxism. And if America were a socialist country, we would have elected Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020. Her solution to make housing cheaper is to make it more expensive by giving first-time homeowners $25,000. Well, as Larry, I think you said, congratulations, your house just got $25,000 more expensive.
That's right.
Like that from Kamala Harris. So that's why people don't trust her on the economy. Her plans are horrible when she even has them.
Yeah, and Chris, unless the voters right now are going to make their decision based on January 6th and abortion, and let's face it, voters who are making their decision of that have already made their decision. Otherwise, that really is the question. She's got to have an answer to that question, because if people think the economy was better under Trump and she can't tell them why they're wrong, it's over.
There's a woman in Philadelphia. She was just part of a focus group not too long ago. I play the clip quite a bit on my show, and maybe you saw it. She's talking about, and while she doesn't necessarily attribute it to Biden and Harris, she says they're killing us without killing us, the government. And she begins to weep, just talking about the cost of a bell pepper and how she's fortunate that she can pay for groceries, but she feels that the government is inflicting this pain on her. And I think most people understand that the government causes this, that eggs, it's not big egg, big food, this whole, nobody's mad at people that provide us goods and services. They're angry that they know it doesn't have to be this expensive. Trump very simply says, we're going to bring down prices by creating more energy. We produce more energy. We can bring down bills. We can bring down costs. People understand that. And people understand that this administration is the enemy of all those things. And I would add, while we're at it, talking about COVID, this is also an administration that tried to weaponize the Labor Department and force everybody to take a shot they didn't want or lose their jobs. I haven't gotten over that one. I don't know about other people, but this government feels like it's very much working against the interests of the American people. And I think whether people can articulate that or not, that is the sense of it. And she is the face of this government. She's trying to act as though she has nothing to do with this place, when in fact she's co-running it.
Yeah, well said. And I think it would serve Trump if he sort of focused on some of the really bad decisions Democrats made during the pandemic. He may be afraid that it'll shine the light on some of the bad decisions he made. But if he owns his decisions and say, listen, let's, really investigate this and fix it, I think it would go a long way.
And in fact, if you remember, he was the one who said, you want me to do what? Shut down the country? I mean, the economy was roaring. And by every metric, people understood he was heading into an election year where if things had been left alone and there was no COVID, there was no reason in the world he wouldn't win a rout with the economy he had until that point.
Yeah. Akash, well, one last point here I want to make, and that is if you hear anything else from the Harris campaign other than what you just saw, and I think in the interview she actually did eventually get to this point, it's if you're angry about inflation, it's because of corporate greed and price gouging. They've been trying this now, I think, for about 6 or 8 weeks. It's the only talking point she's got now that she'll go after these companies. But Akash, we need to revisit this again. They literally have brought up no examples, like zero. There is not one example of any price gouging going on that is causing inflation. That dog ain't barking, is it?
It's completely fake. We just heard earlier this morning, 43% of the S&P 500 is under investigation by the FTC and the DOJ. That is by nature impossible to be the case where sort of collusion is driving up prices. And you look at the kind of industries they've pointed at, groceries, right? Grocery prices actually fell by almost 4% in the month of August. Did you hear a word from Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren about how all of a sudden they're not greedy anymore and greedflation is over? No, of course not. It's a trope. It's nonsense. And they're kind of grasping at straws. I think to Chris's point, people intrinsically get the people who provide us our food and our groceries are not to blame. It is government conditions that are making things expensive. I think that's where the accountability needs to be. And again, to your point, Larry, this is the point Trump and Republicans have got to make over and over and over again. The media is not going to give them a fair shake on it. It's very easy to criticize big corporations, but I think people are able to make the connection that it's not the fault of the corporations. And if all you do is you come in and you try to punish them and raise their taxes, you're just going to make this problem of affordability even worse.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, gentlemen. And I suspect that this case is going to come up at the vice presidential debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance this Tuesday. And no doubt we'll talk about it and show you exactly what was said next week on the Roundtable.